This is how it's going to work tonight. For the first hour or so, up until about 8 o'clock, I am going to ask a series of questions. They're all just basic questions about Common Core. At that point, we're going to allow the audience to ask questions. We'd rather have you ask questions than make statements, but to ask questions of the panelists so you can find more information out. But to start off with, we're going to have each of them give about a 2-minute introduction as to who they are and what they're here for tonight. So go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. I'm Nikki Baser. I'm the General Counsel for the Illinois State Board of Education. And I first just wanted to thank Representative Wheeler for inviting us and for having this forum. We do appreciate her presence on the Education Committee, and having teachers serve in that capacity is always a benefit to the state. I very much appreciate you all coming out. I know it's hard to come out midweek, and this is an extremely important topic, and it's great to see folks who are so dedicated to their communities and to their schools coming out. I will say that the Common Core I think is an incredibly exciting and wonderful development for the state of Illinois. And we're going to answer a lot of questions tonight, and I hope that you'll come away with some good information about the Common Core. The one thing that I really want to start with is the goal of the Common Core is to really, as with all of the work that we do in Education Illinois, is to improve the outcomes for our children. We want to make sure that they are ready for whatever comes post-high school, if that's career, if that's training, if that's college, if that's community college or four-year. And the Common Core gets us moving in that direction. I also want to say that, I've looked through some of the materials tonight, and I hope that we can get to some of the real facts here. The really exciting thing about the Common Core was that it was actually a state initiative. It did not come from the federal government. It's not a national federal program. There was a meeting in around 2008 of the superintendents, the chief state school officers of all of the states, and Dr. Cook, our state superintendent, was there. And at the time, he was looking at the Illinois Learning Standards, which were developed in 1997, and thinking, now is the time to maybe take a look at what we've learned in education since 1997, how we can update the learning standards for today's job and college environment. And he sat down with a couple of the other chiefs from other states and said, hey, are you guys looking at this? Because it would be great to collaborate. Maybe we should have a meeting tomorrow. And 26 states showed up. And the next meeting, 35, and they were from all over the country. And the goal was really to work collaboratively, come up with the best thinking, get input from teachers, from community members, from higher ed, from business leaders, and work together. We know that student may start in 4th grade in Minnesota and end up at the end of 4th grade in Illinois. We want to make sure that there's some commonality on what they're learning so that they're not either 3 months behind or 3 months ahead. We want to share resources. And I think it was such an exciting moment and really led to the adoption of these, the development of these Common Core standards, which I hope we'll talk more about. And I hope that you guys will, on our website, we have so much information about the Common Core. We also have the standards themselves. And I would encourage you guys to take a look at them, read through them. And again, looking forward to answering lots of questions, and thank you for inviting me.
Hi, my name's Erin Rosh, and I'm with a bunch of parents who run StopCommonCoreIllinois.org. It's a website. I have a child in the public schools, and last year I went to a parent conference with the teacher, and I asked the teacher, why are we not working on penmanship? Why are we not working on spelling? Why are we not doing cursive writing? And she said, oh, well, it's not a part of the core curriculum. And I said, well, why don't we want to learn spelling and how to write? That's something you would expect out of your public education. And she said, well, in 4th grade, they're going to get on the computers and spell check will take care of that. So anyway, I decided, what is this core curriculum? And I started looking into it. I had not heard of Common Core until this point, and what I found was shocking and alarming. Common Core is just a small part of what I call the Common Core system. And we'll probably get into more detail when we start asking questions here later in this presentation. But what it is it's really a bunch of projects, initiatives that are all running with each other. The first is the standards, and we're starting with English and math. There's other new standards coming if anyone wants to ask about that with science and social studies. They're not called Common Core, but they're designed to work with it. The second thing is the data collection. We've always collected data here for No Child Left Behind, but it was from kindergarten through 12. With Common Core, we now are collecting from as young as 24 hours old all the way to age 20. And you will have a file on your child that will be in that database. And although they will tell you that the federal government does not have access to that database, they do through the testing consortium. And that's part 3, the testing consortium. We're going to have a whole new set of standardized tests. When you step back from the Common Core and kind of look at the concept, one of my biggest questions, first of all, is the concept. They say that you're college and career ready. By college and career ready, they mean community college. The math is really honed down to where they are looking more at widget stuff, meaning what makes a good employee, not what makes a good person prepared for life. This is all about career training for this 21st century career.
Aaron.
That's a very different concept.
Aaron, I'm going to ask what is Common Core in a couple minutes here, but I'm going to introduce our panelist here and let Bruno introduce himself, and then I'll let you go on and finish what Common Core is. Okay.
Just so you know that I am a social science researcher, so I do have background in social science research, which is really what Common Core is all about. And like I said, I am a mother, and I did graduate from the University of Illinois in Chicago. Thanks.
Hi, I apologize for my tardiness, first of all. My name's Jessica Handy. I'm the Government Affairs Director at Stand for Children. We are an education advocacy group with a focus on improving education outcomes for all kids. We think no matter where you're born and what your zip code is, that you have the human right to have a high-quality public education. So we work with parents who haven't typically been very engaged in their kids' community and help them get involved and see how they can help support their kids and help support systemic reform to ensure that we have the best teachers in the classroom and that we have high-quality school options for every kid. Probably more importantly, I am the mom to Natasha. I live in Springfield, Illinois, so we hit some traffic coming up here, and that explains why I'm so late, but I thank you for having me and inviting me here today.
Thank you. My name is Bruno Barend. I'm the Senior Fellow for Education Issues at the Heartland Institute. It's a free market think tank out of Chicago, covering primarily state and local and some national issues. And if Aaron is the example of the ground war on Common Core and talking about all the details and various things that she has learned about it, I'm going to be here as an opponent of Common Core, kind of giving you the 30,000 foot, 60,000 foot air war kind of idea. And I don't know if you like the metaphor, the war metaphor, but I think it's important to put this in the right perspective, because what's going on here is, if not a war, certainly a competing set of visions. And the Common Core, from my standpoint, where I'm going to come from on this, is the culmination. One hopes it's the last gasp, but it is the culmination of something that they have been trying to do in the United States of America since the founding of the NEA as an administrators group in the 1840s or 50s. And that is this ideology that says that we must centralize the education in the United States of America, and we must therefore have a centralized bureaucracy, a centralized goal, a centralized way for all of us to educate all of our children so that we are all good citizens. Some people may like that idea. They might go back to the Northwest Compact and look at that. But the fact is that this idea was borrowed not from the United States of America, not from our founding ideas or ideology or documents, but from the Prussians, who were very good at sitting in seats and looking at the chalkboard and listening to what they were told. So what I'm going to do over the period of this conversation and as we discuss this is I am going to present to you what I think is a better vision a decentralized vision, a vision that allows teachers to practice their crafts and parents to guide and work with their children in a much better, more efficient fashion than a top-down, centralized, one-size-fits-all system, which we have been moving toward since the 1840s, and I would suggest has increasingly been more expensive with ever-increasing levels of failure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to let Nikki Baser start with this question. In your professional opinion, what are we talking about here? What is Common Core?
Sure, thanks. So the Common Core are standards. Okay, so what standards are they're what students are expected to know and be able to do. They're essentially goals and expectations for what knowledge and skills we want our students to have at the end of their schooling here in Illinois. They're not, and maybe I'll also say what they're not. They are not a curriculum, and that's important because you all live in communities where the teachers and the principals and the parents, they know what kind of curriculum they want to teach. We have local control in this state over education, and so the curriculums that local school districts develop, they develop through their community process, and that will still take place under the Common Core. We had the Illinois Learning Standards. These are similar insofar as they are a set of guideposts for what schools should be aiming for their students to reach, but how they get there is up to the local schools. The standards, and I would say, you know, the great thing about the Common Core is that they are very robust. They allow a lot of flexibility and decision making on the part of the local school districts on how they want to get to where the Common Core is directing them to, is guiding them to go. You know, the Illinois Learning Standards were good, but what we're trying to do with the Common Core is to really put into place rigorous standards so that our kids are ready, and not just ready for community college or career, although those are absolutely noble paths to go down, but also higher educate for four-year education and beyond, if that's the choice that they're making. The standards are not watered down. I was talking to some folks in the audience. They're not less rigorous. In fact, they're more rigorous. A lot of people describe some of our old standards as a mile wide and an inch deep. These are not only trying to teach kids concepts, but how to think about the concepts. I'll give you an example. With math, you know, you might teach a child a mnemonic device to remember a formula. But what if you add a variable into that formula? If you haven't taught that student how that mnemonic device came about, how to think about that problem, when they're faced with a more complex problem, they don't know how to approach it. The Common Core, the goal is to try to give the students the tools, not only for the procedures in math, but also the knowledge to understand how to approach problems. Likewise, in English language arts, writing, reading, comprehension skills. Again, I would really encourage you all to look at them. We actually have a comparison on our website between the old learning standards and the Common Core, so you can take a look at how the changes take place. You know, my son's in kindergarten, so we're just starting. My oldest is in kindergarten, so we're just starting this process. But we already see sort of the excitement in the schools about the rigorousness and the robustness of these standards. So again, I think what we have to remember is that this was a process by which huge numbers of folks had input and thought and really looked to work together to come up with standards for our schools. And Illinois folks had there were 10,000 comments from community members, from teachers, from educators, from higher ed, from business folks that went into the Common Core. The State Board of Education commented and worked with other states to come up with these. So, I think what we've got here is a set of standards that will allow our students to reach the goals that we in the state of Illinois want to see them reach. Shall I turn it over to? I don't know which order we're going in here. So.
You can just.
And you'd like me to tell you what the Common Core standards are?
I want, in your professional opinion, I would like you to just explain what Common Core is for us.
Sure. So I want to step back just a second and talk about when No Child Left Behind first came about. And it was a step in the right direction, I guess. They're saying, well, there should be some accountability. We've got to close achievement gaps. Let's have 100% of our kids eventually meet standards, and we'll put that on the states, and we won't define what those standards are or what assessments you'll use to measure them. But you states, you get your kids to 100% of kids meeting this. So it left a lot of flexibility for states, and really, it almost encouraged a race to the bottom because, if 100% of kids have to meet these standards or else you're facing No Child Left Behind sanctions, you've got an incentive to lowball your standards and then to create an assessment that's pretty easy to meet standards. So parents might go along thinking, oh, my kid's meeting standards, my kid's going to be fine. They get to college and don't realize they're going to have to take 2 semesters of remedial math before they can even get into a credit-bearing course. It's not fair. It's not honest. They are absolutely not college-ready standards. I'm going to push back on one thing Nikki said, which is that Illinois learning standards were good. The Fordham Institute, this is a conservative think tank out of Ohio. If you came to the previous summit that was held in, I don't know, it's about a month ago, right? And Mike Petrilli was there from the Fordham Institute. Well, I read this analysis after I heard him speak, and they read standards of the 50 states, and Illinois was among the lowest. We got a D in math and English standards for their clarity and rigor. Common Core standards are significantly better. These are raising standards for our kids, no doubt about it. And math Common Core standards, previously it used to be a mile wide and an inch deep, where you'd have this spiraling idea. You'd have your kids in first grade, and we got to do addition for 3 weeks, but I don't care if you don't get it. We got to move to subtraction and do that for 3 weeks, and now we have to move on to 3-dimensional shapes, and now we have to move on to patterns. And if you children don't get it, that is tough. You'll have to wait till next time we come around to it in this spiraling curriculum. And the question was never really called. Not knowing or not facing the fact that if we want our kids to understand multiplication, we have to give them a strong foundation in addition first. And so Common Core looks at those stepping stones to what kids need to know to be able to have math fluency. Our old Illinois learning standards let kids have a calculator in 3rd grade, and Common Core standards say you should not be having that in elementary school because kids need to be math literate. They need to understand how numbers work. In English, Common Core standards are bringing us from an era where we would read and write about how we feel to an era where we're reading more informational text. In science class, we might read a biology journal article. We might, in history, read the Declaration of Independence. We might be exposed to different kinds of reading that kids can understand, analyze, write about in an analytical or persuasive way, moving away from just narrative writing, because this is really what kids are going to be exposed to the rest of their life.
Same question. In my professional opinion, what is the Common Core? Is that
Yeah, it's for everybody.
well, we've heard the proponents of Common Core describe it as a centralized way to align all standards or some standards or most standards so that all the kids are learning the same thing. And I think most of us understand that however they try to align, whatever they try to align, the kids in the inner city of Chicago are not going to learn the same as the kids in the magnet school in Chicago, are not going to learn the same as the kids in Grays Lake, are not going to learn the same as the kids in Lake Forest, and that all the standards in the world are not going to correct for the socioeconomic issues and broad diversity, economic, ethnic diversity that you have in a nation of 52 to 54 million children. Common Core is a great concept if you're Finland. When you're all the same race, you're all the same religion, you're all the same, all north of the Arctic Circle, and you all think the same. Centralization doesn't work for the United States of America, and it's not going to. I would argue that a standard drives the curriculum. So when the proponents of Common Core say that all the curriculum is going to remain local, but the standards are rigorous and the standards are going to be driven from the top, that's the same as, McDonald's has a standard. And school districts are much more like a McDonald's franchise in locality than they are like a local school district. So you have to remember this. But when McDonald's says a quarter pounder has to be this kind of meat with this much fat and this much beef, that's a standard. And that drives everything about where they're going to buy the meat, how they're going to put the buns, how much ketchup they're going to squirt onto it, and everything else like that. So the idea that the curriculum will remain free and local and wonderful and driven by your teacher is mostly nonsense. And this is true, driven specifically from a experience out of Pennsylvania, where the law itself says that only 13% of the curriculum is able to be allowed to be locally driven, and everything else has to be driven by the curriculum organizations and the testing consortia and everything that are driving the standards. So you have to be very careful about whether or not these things are really rigorous. Is it rigorous not to teach a child to spell because they're going to be able to use spell check? I wouldn't call that a rigorous standard. So there's a whole range of things that you have to stop and think about, and what I want you to do as this conversation progresses is ask yourself whether a top-down, one-size-fits-all centralization it works best for your child, works best for your community, or whether there isn't a better way to do this. And I think that that's what we have to start the conversation, is the better way to do this.
So to me, I'm sorry, out of turn, I had already started talking about this. Common Core is really a bunch of programs. It's a system. They're all running in concert with each other. When they say that the standards are more rigorous, they are more rigorous in certain areas. They actually definitely are. But what's happened is they've dropped away a lot of what most of you probably learned in school. They don't think it's necessary anymore. And really it's the process about that that's bad. Because although they say, oh, we had public comment, these standards were approved, I think it was on June 1st, and they reviewed them on the 25th, and they were in effect a month later. A month is really not a long time to evaluate basically the fundamental transformation of schools. This is a big picture thing. They start a file on your kid in the P20 database. Now the federal government is loose in privacy laws and what's allowable to be collected. We don't know long-term what Illinois will decide to do as far as data collection, but what we do know is your kid is now a widget. The teacher logs into a computer. They're tracking, they're looking at graphs. Are there good things about that? Sure, of course there probably are good things about that. But again, it's the process here. Did you know that? Did your teacher tell you that? With the English language standards, they're going a lot to informational text. The person who wrote the standards for English language, the self-proclaimed writer of it, he said he wants children to only think within the four corners of the page. What that means is that if you're reading the Gettysburg Address, you don't talk about that it's actually on a, literally lime-covered, horrible battlefield in the Civil War. You're just learning how to deep read, look at the words, the complexity of text, not the context of what it meant to our culture. As far as the math goes, they've peeled away, like I said, a lot of the more theoretical math. They're trying to create people who can go into the so-called 21st century job. Another thing about Common Core is really it is a corporate takeover of the schools. Most of the researchers, the panels, and the non-for-profits who are working on Common Core are Bill Gates funded. The Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation. I don't know if Bill Gates is an evil mastermind or the biggest hearted man in the world. What I know is he paid for it. The federal government says they're not involved, yet they did pay for the testing. They have contributed money into that. Why did Illinois take this? Because they got boatloads of stimulus funds. And when you took that money, you had to say as a condition that you would expand your database from the preschool through till age 20, that you would take the standards and you would take the testing. So this was pushed on a very, very broke state. Although I must say most of the people in Illinois and the educrats were very pro Common Core. They don't see it as being pushed on it. They were eager to have it. I guess my last comment is, what is Common Core to me? It's my phone ringing every single day, all day long, teachers living in fear, calling me from the bathroom at their school. They're so upset their children are crying and throwing themselves on the floor in kindergarten because they're asked to do deep thinking in kindergarten. There's a lot of problems with this. I have parents calling me. Catholic schools and Lutheran schools are getting pressured into adopting this in Illinois. It's a very emotional issue that we really were blindsided by. So it was rolled out very poorly.
Well, as a follow-up to that, and I'll let Nikki respond to this, what's the process of how this is being implemented here in Illinois?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. I'm also happy to talk about how it was rolled out originally. But I do want to just respond to one thing that the first speaker, the gentleman from the Heartland Institute said. You know, I'm just not going to sit here and accept the fact that just because you live in inner city Chicago, you can't learn as well or the same way as someone who lives in Lake Forest, a kid in Lake Forest. Every kid in the state of Illinois has the right to a high quality, top education, and all of those kids have the ability to learn. And you know, yes, there are socioeconomic issues that plague our state that affect kids in rural districts, that affect kids in inner city districts, who affect kids in suburban districts. We have low-income students, we have kids in poverty in every one of our districts in the state of Illinois, and all of those kids can learn. And if we sit here and say that there's groups of kids that we can't even touch, we've given up. And in my mind, that's the worst thing we could possibly do for these kids. You know, in terms of how this happened, you know, it absolutely did not happen overnight or 2 days later. The process started in 2009. There were comment periods over the span of 2 years where the State Board of Education solicited, where the Common Core, the folks that were developing the Common Core solicited. 10,000 of your Illinois citizens responded to that those comment periods. The rulemaking, which put the Common Core into place, went in front of the General Assembly. Their joint rulemaking. There's a process where when that happens, it goes through public comment at the State Board. It goes through public comment period following its introduction to the Joint Rulemaking Committee. Lots of ample time over the span of 3 years to really weigh in. And then the implementation began in 2010. When they were adopted, when these standards were adopted. And I will just sort of clarify for you, again, we have Illinois learning standards now. There is a central set of standards in Illinois that are the same thing. They are goalposts. And as Jessica said, there are a lot of problems with the Illinois learning standards. That's what we're trying to do at the State Board, is to address those issues. But it doesn't change the fact that there have always been learning standards in Illinois, and the Common Core is just is a new version of that, but it still gives schools the same ability to change curriculums, to use curriculums, to adapt curriculums, to share curriculums. What they've always done in the state with the Illinois Learning Standards, they can do with the Common Core. So we see districts rolling this out, and you know, I'm sure that there is. I'm sure that change in schools is always difficult, and teachers have a lot thrown at them. Goodness knows, we put a lot on our teachers, and they perform admirably. I'm sure there are teachers who are concerned about this. I'm sure there are parents that are concerned. What we hear overwhelmingly from teachers is how positive they are about the Common Core curriculum. What we hear from the PTA, the Illinois PTA, is that they're hearing overwhelmingly positive things from their parents. We're hearing that across Illinois. Of course, every district is going to implement differently. Every district is going to have its challenges. Every district is going to have its triumphs. We at the State Board are committed to helping. We have lots of resources on our website. We have folks at our agency who can help, and we see really successful implementation of the Common Core as it's rolled out in schools and as schools are adopting. Always there's going to be bumps along the way, but I think that what we see is really good, exciting work on the Common Core happening in our schools.
If the rest of the panelists want to chime in on the implementation question, that's fine.
Go ahead, Bruce.
So one thing I think we should be careful of, Erin's commenting about these teachers and parents and students who she's hearing from who are really upset by what she's attributing to be Common Core. And I would say let's not throw our hands up and say, oh, Common Core is responsible for this. Let's actually get involved in with our local school boards that is determining curriculum, with our local PTOs, and talk about this, because there's no reason that Common Core would be to blame for a child throwing themselves on the floor crying because they don't get something. I mean, you still have Common Core actually even gives more ability for autonomy and innovation to local districts, because Common Core is saying, here you go, these are the standards, here's what you're expected to reach. Now you guys decide what to do. You guys determine your own curriculum, and it's opening up these doors to innovation across the country. Teachers are able to share their curriculum across state lines now. There's going to be so much opportunity, and at the same time, there are things that are going to be billed as this is Common Core aligned that is totally not. And you as citizens, as community members, should be looking at that. Look at your kids' materials, talk to your school board, and make sure that you like what's going on there, because there is lots of room for local control in this. And if we say Common Core is to blame for all of it, I can't do anything, then we're really abdicating our responsibility as parents to get involved and to talk about that.
With the implementation, again, I just want to warn you that the PTA took a huge grant from Bill Gates, and they are producing what I call propaganda about the Common Core. I received it from my school. The Illinois Association of School Boards, if you look on my website right now, on their page for principal or for school board members, they have a guide about how to find key communicators in the community, like, for example, a member of this church, and then infiltrate and see what people are talking about over their backyard fence and control the message in the community. That's right there on their website. If you look at my website, you can see it. The implementation of Common Core is a propaganda war. It's funded by Bill Gates, and it sells it. Now, of course, when you're selling a product that you're going to make a lot of money off of course you're going to put out really great commercials. I will say that a lot of schools have done an excellent job training their teachers on Common Core, whether the teachers agree with it or not. I'm not blaming the Illinois School Board. They decided to sign on to Common Core, and they got what they signed on for. I also would say that, yes, there are problems with the implementation, because a lot of what the standards demand in the lower grades are, according to child psychiatrists, inappropriate for a child. Their brain's just not at the point of having little staff meetings in kindergarten and working on artwork with consensus. Have you ever tried to have a kindergartner work with consensus where they all agree on what the little dog should look like? No. They are on the floor crying because they don't want peer review in kindergarten. That comes later in development. My child didn't want my review of their artwork in kindergarten because they'd be on the floor crying. Again, we have wonderful teachers in Illinois, and they really are doing the best they can. Like I said, my phone rings all day. I'm the Illinois Common Core counseling line. Apparently, my phone number gets passed around to parents and teachers. And, I think that we all just need to know where this is coming from, and the publishers are making a lot of money. A lot of the books with the Common Core seal on the front are literally almost exactly the same book it was before Common Core. And a lot of publishers are putting out a lot of trash, actual pornography, and it all has a seal on the front that says Common Core. Now, of course, the developers of Common Core did not intend for pornography to be in the schools, but there's a lot of problems here, part of which is because Common Core was rushed along to get in line to take advantage of that stimulus money.
Let me just clarify something for all of you and for Nikki as well. When I commented on the socioeconomic differences in the United States, none of that was intended to give anyone the idea that it's okay that we're just going to have to write some people off. That's the exact opposite of my message. As a matter of fact, I think that it is centralization. It is the district system. It is the zip code system that has created the educational apartheid that has damaged the inner city kids so much, when there are far better ways to incentivize and produce education for these children. So far be it from me to talk about the soft bigotry of low expectations, which is what the existing system does, whether it intends to or not. What I'm rather doing is saying that this Common Core, it'll come around again. If it fails, if it doesn't work, it's going to come around as the Common Backward Smoke Bender, or Goals 2016, or Outcome-Based Core, or the Core Outcome-Based Curriculum. They'll name it something, because they've been trying to name it this, and they've been trying to do this for decades. So what you have to remember is that there is nothing really new or special here. This is another attempt, hopefully the last attempt, the last gasp of the centralization in the district-based system. What we need to have is completely, and I want to invite you to compare, because now we're comparing the Common Core to what? The Illinois standards? I think all of us agree that there were ways to improve standards, but there's also ways to water down standards and centralize standards that don't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you for just a moment to look at a different vision, and that is numerous testing systems, numerous curricula, numerous ways to get tested, that instead of 2 consortia funded by all the funding interests that want to do this, rather, instead of that, have 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 consortia or companies or private institutions, or Khan Academy. Has anybody seen Khan Academy? You can go on Khan Academy, and it'll figure out exactly where you are and exactly where you can go instantaneously. Let there be 10,000 Khan Academies. And that is a system when the money follows the child to a vast new array of independent content providers. It'll be a far superior system than anything that could be imagined by a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., getting together with a bunch of bureaucrats in the 50 states, getting together with a bunch of people in 14,000 top-down, zip code-based, apartheid-oriented school districts to ram something down your throats and then say, oh, but you get to have 13% of the curriculum over here from your fine teachers.
All right, now I'm going to ask 2 more questions before we get to the audience questions. The first one should be a simple one. Has the Illinois legislature voted on adopting the Common Core standards, and if not, why not?
So the process in Illinois is what the state statute says, the school code says, is that the State Board of Education adopts learning standards for Illinois. And they do that through regulation. And so the way the rule-making process works for the State Board is the State Board, which is made up of 9 members of the community in Illinois, get together and they vote to put forth a rulemaking. Then there's a period of public comment, then they adopt it, and it goes to the Joint Commission for Rulemaking, which is a bipartisan body made up of members of the General Assembly. And they then weigh in on the rules and adopt the rules. So the General Assembly doesn't vote on learning standards, but they vote on the rules to implement the standards. The standards themselves are designed by the State Board of Education.
And did you say the State Board has approved the standards so far, or they have not approved them?
No, they have. The Common Core was approved in 2010. It went to the General Assembly's Joint Rulemaking Committee, and they approved it in 2010 as well.
And did anybody else want to follow up on that? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, your state assembly member, they did not vote on this. Like I said, I sit all day long. I'm an unemployed mom. I get phone calls all day. People go in, they meet with their state rep. Their state rep really literally knows nothing about Common Core except that they got a big check from the stimulus bill. That's pretty much all they know about it, because they didn't vote on it, because it's not a law, and it's not a law we can repeal. It's a bunch of what it was that, and I won't go through the whole process, but it was a 2 or 3 step process where to qualify for Race to the Top funds and also the state stabilization funds out of the stimulus bill, which quite frankly, if Illinois didn't get that funding, one wonders how many schools would have closed. Basically, there were strings attached. And so the General Assembly more or less what they've told me personally was, well, here's these strings. We have to have this money. What do we need to do this? Now, there's people in the state who are fans of Common Core. In fact, Illinois is a leader on a lot of this Common Core system programs. And I'm not going to sit here and say every single thing about every standard and every initiative and everything is bad, because obviously it's not. There's a lot of really good people who are involved here. But the point is that we were not voted on it. Did any of you get a letter at home saying go make public comment on the Illinois Board of Education website? No, I don't know a soul who knew about that. And they really did get the final draft, and it was on the ground rolling in Illinois within a month. I read the notes from that school board meeting, the Illinois State School Board meeting. And they had spent a couple years putting everything in place to be able to take those stimulus funds. So that is true.
I just wanted to respond to a couple of the statements that were made, just to clarify some facts. The Common Core standards were implemented in Illinois in 2010. There were no federal dollars attached to the Common Core implementation. I'm going to say that again. There was no federal dollars attached to our implementation of the Common Core. It is true that Illinois did receive a Race to the Top grant in 2011. Which was after the implementation of the Common Core. And yes, the federal government did, as part of their Race to the Top application, say, if you adopted the Common Core, we're going to look favorably on that. But it did not give you money to implement the Common Core. And so I want to be clear about this. This was a state-led initiative to develop learning standards, okay? There's a lot of other information being talked about here, are the longitudinal data system, testing. We can certainly talk about those, but what we're talking about here tonight, the focus of this, is a set of learning standards, rigorous learning standards that are guideposts and goals for our local districts to reach in order to improve the educational outcomes of our children. You know, this is not a vast conspiracy to hide from you all what was in the standards. There were 10,000 comments on the standards. There were more comments when we went through the rulemaking. The members of the General Assembly, we at the State Board take our responsibility very seriously with the members of the General Assembly. Quarterly, we hold open phone calls with members of the General Assembly where all sorts of issues are discussed. Common Core in particular has been. This year alone, we had meetings in March, in April, in September. We've testified at budget hearings, at subject matter hearings on the Common Core, well before they were implemented, well after. We want people to weigh in on this. We want to hear from Illinois, and we do. We hear from citizens, from parents, from superintendents, from principals all the time on these issues. And we take that into account when we are formulating these really important pieces of our educational program here in Illinois. And so I do want to be clear on the timeline here and the sort of what funds were actually involved. Thanks.
I want to touch on the Race to the Top issue as well, because I hear this a lot. This seems to keep coming up. And I think a lot of people somehow have this misconception that Race to the Top was offered to states exclusively for adopting Common Core standards. And that can't be further from the truth. In Illinois, our state superintendent in, 2007, 2008, was, talking to other state superintendents and why do we have this redundancy? Why are we all developing these different assessments? It doesn't make any sense. What do kids in Illinois need to know that's different from kids in Indiana, that's different from kids in Missouri? Jobs are mobile, and we live in a global economy, and it just makes sense for us to have standards that are college and career ready, and to have one assessment to measure them so we can see how we're doing and make sure that our kids are getting what they need to do to be ready for college and career. So when Race to the Top came around, it's not like Illinois didn't know that it was interested in raising its standards to college and career ready level. We were there already, and Race to the Top was a federal competitive grant program that offered states this chance to compete to get this money, and it was out of 500 points total. There were 70 points that came from having having high standards, college and career ready standards, and the rest of it were from things that I suspect most of you will like quite a bit, like having a charter friendly environment. We lifted our cap on the number of charter schools that could operate in Illinois, which made us more competitive for Race to the Top. The biggest thing we did to make ourselves more competitive for Race to the Top was we linked teacher and principal evaluations to student growth. So we'd seen these studies that show 0.4% of teachers are rated unsatisfactory, which basically means teachers weren't getting any feedback and no one was actually evaluating them. So we are in the process of implementing a rigorous new evaluation process that's going to enable teachers to get the feedback they need to grow and develop as professionals, and we're going to incorporate student growth in those evaluations for teachers and principals. All of this stuff was related to Race to the Top. And I was a legislative staffer at the time when all this was going on, and high standards was not like something attached to Race to the Top at the time. It was something we were on.
I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna let us move on real quick so I can ask one more question, unless you want to have one comment before I ask my question, before I let the audience ask their question.
My comments into the next question.
Well, I want to know what the Common Core standards are as compared to the former state standards then.
And this is a good time for me to incorporate my remarks. Somewhere in this rammed through without anybody knowing, and we all had hearings about this and we communicated with everybody. I think there's enough evidence on both sides to show that some kind of process was met, and there probably was some kind of hearing notice. But in the midst of all of this, we kind of have to think about it from this perspective. We remember of a very notorious person in politics saying, to read what's in the bill, to find out what's in the bill, you're going to have to pass it. And that did happen with Common Core here. And this is starting to happen everywhere across the spectrum on all kinds of policies, is that more and more information and more issues that are in our lives are implemented through much more opacity and much less debate than we've had here. So I think it's important, and I'll go right back to a solid issue here. I think it is entirely fair for Dwight Kay's bill. I don't know the number you gave. I'll find out in just a second. But to do a pause button, hit the pause button on this, and slow it down. The inertia is all there, and all of that is going to happen. So to get to the specific question, you're saying, how do the standards compare? To the best of my knowledge, and Aaron may have more information on this than I do, there are some states that had very poor standards that they look great on tests, and then I'll give you a quick background. There's something called the National Assessment of Education Progress. It's called the NAEP test. It's not given to every student. It's not like the Illinois State Standards or the ISAT, but they call it the National Report Card. And what would happen with the NAEP test is you would see the states with very poor standards test poorly on the NAEP, but they did okay on their state standards. And then states like Massachusetts, that probably most people would agree had the highest and best standards prior to the Common Core, their kids would always test very closer to slightly above NAEP, which was, again, that's the National Report Card. And it has been shown that the Common Core test results, to the extent that we have very many of them, and we don't have very many of them yet, but to the extent that that they've been tested, that the Common Core standards do come closer to the NAEP. So those are the kinds of things that the proponents of Common Core are going to argue show that the standards are rigorous and college ready and wonderful and covered with sweetness and light. The fact of the matter is, again, I'm going to come back to this same issue. There are better ways to test, and the idea that the job in Minnesota is the same as the job in Illinois, and therefore we need a standardized test on that, I think it's time to question that, because yes, we do need to know that kids can travel from one place to another, but a broad centralized test driven from the top down with a single set of standards that narrows the curriculum is not the best way to create an educated populace. It might be the best way to create a bunch of really nice, good little Prussians who all know the same thing, but that whole strata of economy is changing. That the Industrial Revolution, which which is what's driving all of this widgetized, everybody has to learn the same thing, that's already on the way out if you look at what's happening with jobs. And what we need is a standard system and a testing system that is much more organic and free-flowing than this idea that one size fits all can work for everybody.
Yes, I agree that our previous Illinois state standards were very, very low. These standards, like I said, they are more rigorous in the areas that this secretive committee decided should be boosted up because they fit the criteria of the so-called 21st century job. So it's not really a matter of them being more rigorous, less rigorous. It's a matter of what they focus on in the standards has changed. And sort of the philosophy has changed. Like I said, now in kindergarten, they start very early making your student feel like the collective is what should be focused on. There's things that probably everyone in this room would agree on and things that everyone in this room maybe wouldn't like. So, you know, we can sit and talk the standards, and every debate that I'm in, the person who is arguing for the standards keeps saying, come on guys, just look at the standards, you can read them. And I do encourage you to read them. But the fact is, this is a system. It's the fundamental transformation of your schools. You have to look at the standards and then look how it fits in to the database, the testing, the data collection, the social science research, the widgetizing, comparing this child who's, you know, black and in Chicago and in the socioeconomic strata to another. And I totally agree that every child in Illinois should get a great education, and every teacher should hold those children to account, and the teacher should be held at account. But as Bruno said over and over again, this really is No Child Left Behind on steroids. The reason they went to Common Core is because the states just kept lowering their standards because they were being held to performance metrics under No Child Left Behind. And Illinois', you know, standards had really good things about them, but they really were quite low. So again, it's this centralization doesn't work. Common Core is just doubling down on No Child Left Behind. And I doubt there's anyone in this room who's really a fan of No Child Left Behind. It's really not that different, except now the states can't set their own standard. Everyone has to have the same. And the other thing that I'm going to mention is now that states have Common Core, the rollback, the fight back across the states is huge, because now that they've got the bill and they've read the bill, they're not so happy. You have Alabama, Alaska, Georgia, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Wisconsin, Florida, and then I guess you could probably throw Illinois in, who are having hearings, have legislation, or didn't do it to begin with. So the concept of every state being the same is probably not going to work out. And just my little statement, final statement is, if you look on my website, the application for Race to the Top is right there, signed by Governor Quinn and by Mr. Cook, who's our state superintendent. It says right there. Of course, the federal government is clever enough to not name Common Core in that document because by Constitution, they're not allowed to force a curriculum or standards on the states. What it said is that you have to have college and career standards that meet our requirements. And you can read the whole application. It's right there on my website. It's right on the Illinois School Board website. And you can decide for yourself if they didn't get points in the full application process for having Common Core or not. And it also mentions the database and the testing, the three things that I mentioned. So you can decide for yourself. That's just sort of a mincing of words.
How are Common Core standards different than previous standards?
I just want to compare the two, yeah.
Compare the two. I want to actually compare the application of the two, because you heard me talk about the Fordham Institute study that our old math and English standards got a D, the Common Core standards get an A- and a B+. And the data system that keeps coming up, can I tell you why I'm so excited for this data system? Right now, when we're looking at No Child Left Behind, we're saying, you know, this cohort of 11th graders got, 50% of them met and exceeded, and now the next cohort tests. We're looking at apples to oranges. It's really, I mean, you can see that this cohort of kids has done better or worse than the last one, but they're not the same kids, and it's not the same It's not the same metric. With the other thing that this does is it encourages schools to really just look at, kids, are you right here? Are you at the benchmark? Did you meet standards? And kids that are a little below, they'll work with. Kids that are a little above, they'll work with, because really you're being judged on whether you can cross that line. So schools have this incentive, and I'm not saying all of them do. Some there's just an incentive to ignore kids that are way below that level and kids that are way above that level, because you're not measuring growth. You're not able to measure growth. No Child Left Behind did not have a good system in place for doing that. And this data system that is held to extremely strict privacy standards. No student level data can ever be transmitted to the federal government. The only things they get are aggregated data files. But what's going to be great is that teachers are going to be able to see where a kid started and where a kid got to. You're going to be able to measure that growth and see the effect of an individual teacher on that child. We're going to be able to direct our state dollars to effective programs so that we can maximize student outcomes with the limited budget we have. I am so excited for this data system.
I'm not sure where to begin. All of this is so interesting to discuss. I'm not really sure where this idea of widgets and Prussians has come into the conversation, and I would, the Common Core standards are about teaching kids independent thinking, about complex independent thinking, about building strong content knowledge so that they can look at a problem, understand it, to respond to varying audiences and tasks. So if they're approaching a scientific paper, it's different than approaching historical document. Definitely context for what that document means. Comprehending but also critiquing, understanding where a viewpoint is coming from and knowing how to critique as well as understand it. Using evidence to support their arguments, using technology thoughtfully. All of these things are part of the Common Core. And I did want to I want to respond because the issue of the House resolution has come up, and Representative Wheeler put some questions on the table about money and funding, which hasn't really come up in these questions, and I just wanted to address that briefly. The Common Core has been under implementation in Illinois since 2010. You have schools across Illinois who have put incredible amounts of time and energy and effort into implementing the Common Core. To simply halt the implementation, I'm not exactly sure then where you go. Do you go back to the old learning standards, which we all seem to agree were not rigorous, were not what we wanted to use for our students? Do you have no standards at all, so we're sort of all fumbling around in the dark on this? I think that it's concerning to me and to us at the state board and to districts who have really spent the time and energy implementing, that we would sort of just halt this in its tracks. And I wanted to address the money piece of this. There is no cost to the implementation of Common Core in the sense of every school district has money in their budget to put in new curriculums. You don't use the same books from 1997, from 2002. So the curriculums that you're adopting for the Common Core, of course, you're going to use your local dollars like you would when you update your curriculum materials. And so, schools have already invested that money and that energy and, are excited about the Common Core, and we would hope that we continue to work with the Common Core so that we can move this forward. Obviously, we respect the role of the General Assembly here and what the General Assembly wants to do, and if that's the way it moves. But we would hope that that you all would, look at our resources, read more, talk to the folks up here more, and weigh in on this debate, because I think you'll see some really exciting things going on at your schools with the Common Core.
All right, thank you. I'm going to open this up now to audience questions and answers. I'm going to let did you have a question, Mike? Or? Okay, hold on. I'm going to let the panelists give about 1 minute responses if we can. I pushed the time a little bit because we started late, but we have to be done by 9, so 1 minute if you could. So I'll let the question in the back here first.
Well, I don't know all the specifics, and I'm certainly not an expert on Common Core. but I have lived through some history. And, I look at in 1976, Jimmy Carter formed the Department of Energy. The sole purpose was to make America more energy independent. They've been at it for 36 years with a budget of $68 billion. At what point do we say you failed? The Department of Education came on the scene in 1979. Since then, the cost of education has skyrocketed, and our education has gone down. We're now 16th in the world in our education. And we've always got people from the government implementing this and implementing that. But to me, it's like a traveling road show with selling us medicine, and now you got just a different kind of tonic. And the only data mining that's going to come out of this is now we're going to be 16.2578 in the world. So my question is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. At what point, who can we blame now for the state of our education? And are you going to come back if Common Core fails and say you're sorry?